Welcome back to Between Two Racks with the Kilo Crew. Today's episode, supposedly everybody's favorite, another installment of Rapid Fire Q&A. So, let's kick it. I'll get us started with a question from Thibaut. I know he's listening to this at 6 a.m. on the Monday it gets posted. Well, it's not 6 a.m. for him, but for someone training twice a week in full body, would it be better to maintain a medium volume for the primary exercises in the A and B series and reduce the number of sets in the C and D, or to keep the primary exercises in the A and B series at low volume and increase the number of sets in C and D, all to ensure the sessions are manageable in terms of volume and timing?
Whew, it's hot in here.
I mean, to me, it's a simple answer. I'm not sure if you guys would agree, but I would say to go medium volume with A and B and lower volume with C and D, because at the end of the day, the main quote-unquote money maker with strength training or your multi-joint, more compound movement. So I'd rather a person only training twice a week doing full body sessions spends more time rehearsing and training the multi-joint movements as opposed to spending more time on assistance and remedial.
Yeah. One reason you could go the other way with it is if someone's really untrained and like just needs to develop muscle mass, and they're not going to get that as much through the multi-joint movements because they're so unskilled with it at that point. So you could look at your A and B series as skill acquisition, where they're just doing it for rehearsal and trying to get better at the skill. You can't allocate as much time to that, obviously, if their goal is body composition and strength gains. But so they do that there, and then they dedicate a little bit more time to the assistance and remedial exercises so they can work a bit harder on exercises that aren't as complex in the learning. But I do agree with Steph, once someone gets to the point of has the motor pattern down and is looking to maximize strength in a twice a week format, they're better off spending more time in their session dedicated to the compound movements.
That's a good point, but you could almost argue that if the trainee is in a position where their skill is at a low level in the multi-joint, you could almost at that point in time keep medium volume with the C and D and still use medium. Keep a higher volume with the B and C's, but still keep that higher volume on the A and B, but use incomplete rest because the load is not that high. So at least they have potential for more skill rehearsal,
which is probably the best of both worlds, to be honest, because when you're training twice a week, the amount of volume you're doing isn't that high, so you're not worried about the recoverability of it. It's the time constraints that we're mostly considering. So doing the incomplete rest with a higher amount of sets would be a really good way of getting both the skill acquisition and then still dedicating time to more the strength and hypertrophy benefits of your assistance and remedial work.
Yeah. But it could also just be even throughout A, B, C, D, depending on the person, right?
Yeah, but that was part two of his question. Do you want everything even? Yeah. Or do you want a little bit more in the primary? But
it depends.
Yeah.
This is just a random question. For someone like the Gen Pop who's just training the twice a week full body like this, are you ever moving them beyond being a beginner in weight training if they're only training twice a week?
Probably. It will take a long time. Yeah, not really.
I mean, there's no such thing as a advanced trainee training twice a week unless they're in a transition phase or in season as an athlete, but for a Gen Pop training like year round, there's no such thing as a advanced training twice a week.
Yeah. And then I'll move that question into, could you explain the long-term periodization database and the training volume, low, medium, high, with general population clients? After what year would you move from beginner to intermediate and best advice for volume selection. So first off, for this question, we do have a Between Two Racks episode where we go in depth on all of our resources, but we know not everyone listens to every episode. So we will cover this again a little bit. So Porrick.
So the long-term periodization database with 3 different models. So a novice, an intermediate, and advanced. And the biggest difference is the novice is the lowest overall intensity, the intermediate intensity, and advanced is a higher intensity model. And they're not huge difference between them, but it's a significant enough change that it is worth differentiating between them. Then within each model, we have a low volume, a medium volume, and a high volume. The way I like to think about this is probably 70 to 80% of the world is going to fall in that medium volume range. And then you're going to have the outliers on either side. People with very low recoverability might respond better to low volume. People with very good work capacity might respond better to high volume, but it's not the norm. The medium volume is that like middle ground, that it's medium for a reason. Most people fall within the averages. But in terms of, well, to answer one of the questions, when do you move on from novice to intermediate? Well, all the periodization models are 4 years in duration. So you move on after 4 years. So you go through the full model, which if you follow each phase for 12 weeks with a transition week in between each macrocycle, it'll take you 4 years to complete one model. So then you go
Probably sounds so silly to some people.
Like 4 years. But why rush it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's like we're talking about a very small change from intermediate or from novice to intermediate anyway. So like it's a progressive 4 year model. Then you go to the next one, which is progressive off the first model. So it makes sense. And then between low, medium, and high, depending on the person's training history, sporting history, I will either start people at low or medium volume. I'll never start someone off at high volume. The chances of them needing to start there is very slim. So if someone has a really good training history, has done a lot of training in the past, has played a lot of sport, I'm more likely to start them at the medium volume. If someone hasn't got that, I'll definitely start them at a low volume and gauge their recovery. And then if they are recovering very well and finding the overall exposure very easy, I'll bump them up to medium.
I remember someone asked me one time if they should go from, let's say they start novice and then they start low volume, then move on to the medium volume. And that's definitely not what we would recommend. Like you start someone at medium volume and then you go from novice to intermediate to advanced if you need to.
Yeah, it's just like people, like one nuance is the novice, intermediate, and advanced periodization model are not related to the training age. That it's related to the model. So in the world of the training models, this is the novice model, this is the intermediate model, this is the advanced model. Because of course, if you've been training really, really well and consistently and hard for a year, by the time you're at year 2, you're not a beginner anymore. You're more intermediate, but you're still within the novice model. That's a good way to put it. There's no reason to switch at this point in time because that model is 4 years. It takes 4 years to go through the intensity fluctuations. So by the time that you're done with model 1, even like just bumping volume and redoing that model would be counterproductive because now you're repeating the exact same intensity continuum. So that's why you do 4 years of model 1 or novice. Then you move on to model 2, where now it's different intensity fluctuations at a slight average intensity, which correlates with the changes in neuromuscular capacity with training age. And then you do that for another 4 years. And then on year 9, you move on to the advanced model and on and on and on.
And what a great selling point for your client. You can be like, this is what I have. I can keep you progressing for 12 years. Like you're never going to have exactly the same program. It's already all thought out. It's like you got to use that with your clients for sure.
Yeah, it's just that the intensity fluctuations are what dictates your long-term periodization. It's what allows you to like not only progress in load and strength and hypertrophy, but it's also what allows you to progress in terms of recovery. So that's why you need proper intensity fluctuation. So instead of doing it at random and unknowingly year to year to year to year, you're repeating the exact same sequence of intensity and going nowhere. At least now you have some type of guiding light as to where you're going in time with your training.
So I think this kind of goes in because it was a point I wanted to bring up, because someone replied back to him and said, always start with novice for Gen Pop. So are you, with what you just said, are you saying that you do always start with novice with a Gen Pop client? Because say you do have a more, like someone who has trained, that's been training for a while, and they come to you, would you still start them at novice?
No.
Yeah, so it's incorrect to say that.
Yeah, but again, it always depends on what is the person's definition of Gen Pop. So, for example,
well, to me, Gen Pop is like we always talk about it. It's just anyone that's not competing in a sport competitively that trains.
For me as well.
Yeah.
So that's why. So, like for example, my online clients, the vast majority are personal trainers. A lot of them, when they hire us, they already have like years and years of training age. So then the way I select which model to use has more to do with their training background, their current strength level. So, for example, if I'm training someone who's been training for 10 years, who's really, really advanced, who squats twice body weight, well, I'm going to start on the advanced model or model 3, because that intensity bracket fits that client better. But if it's someone who's never trained before, or the regular folk who works out at LA Fitness randomly twice a week and they've been doing it for years, but you know what I mean, is there whatever, well then I'll start at novice, because they don't have a true strength training experience. So by starting at novice now, I'm allowing more potential or more room for growth.
Okay. What's the source of the 60-minute cortisol-testosterone explanation? Well, what's the 60-minute cortisol-testosterone that he's referring to?
Does it just say 60-minute testosterone?
Cortisol-testosterone.
I mean, the explanation is a reflection of the study. So, I mean, so where is the study from? Multiple, like Pakarinen, Hakkinen, Romby, Kramer in the U.S. I mean, a bunch of people in the late 90s did a lot of research looking at hormonal output from different training protocols. So it kind of started there. You know, they were seeing through different training protocols that with strength training, both testosterone and cortisol increases. But after a certain time, then the ratio of testosterone to cortisol becomes inverted. And if you prolong the training period, then you end up in a situation where testosterone becomes like drops, like in 30% certain instances, and cortisol keeps ramping up. So what happened from this, the suggestion was like, well, maybe we should make sure that the training gets done within a 60-minute window, so that then when we recover, we have less of a disparity to recover from in terms of testosterone and cortisol. So that's where the whole 60-minute thing came from. And that's also one of the reasons why the Bulgarians have multiple 30-minute training sessions instead of long training sessions to optimize that. But outside of the testosterone to cortisol ratios, even more important than this, it's the neural fatigue from a session that's over 60 minutes. So the longer the training session is, the more fatigued the central nervous system becomes, and the harder it gets to the central nervous system to target the proper motor unit pool or the higher threshold motor unit pull that's needed for a strength response. So that's why 16. But the one thing that's really important to understand, it's not like it's not like being in the gym for more than 60. Like the gym per se has nothing to do with increase, because you could mess around for 3 hours in the gym and do 5 sets in 3 hours. It won't creep up cortisol. So it's more a reflection of the amount of volume and intensity. Intensity is actually more like, there was this 2019 study where they were looking at the intensity of different training modes of training, and in all instances, it didn't matter if it was strength training, bike, or whatever it might be. The more intense the output was, and the more volume performed at high intensity within a certain time frame, the higher the disruption in growth hormone, testosterone, cortisol was. So it is a matter of volume and intensity. So that's why I'm saying, I said this in the past, if we're talking about a gymnast or Olympic weightlifter that does one set every 4 or 5 minutes, they could be in the gym for 2 hours. That's not a big deal. But if you're doing like a German body comp, for example, and you go past 60 minutes, then it becomes really daunting on a recovery perspective. Mm. And there's like, just if you go on Google Scholar and search like strength training and testosterone or DHEA cortisol ratio, you're going to find multiple study that talks about this. It's just that the 60-minute thing, you just have to be careful at what is that 60-minute. It's not like if you train Mrs. Jones for the first time and she's learning movements and you go over 60 minutes, it's no big deal. There is no true hormonal disruption that's going to happen from this. But if all of us are training really hard, like Porik yesterday on his workout, like I don't see how he could have kept going effectively for much longer than what he did. Like there would have been a crazy point of diminishing return on a DHEA cortisol ratio. So it doesn't come from one person. It was a trend in the field in the 90s that was studied. And those were kind of like the parameters that were proposed by guys like Paul Chek and Ian King and Charles Poliquin back in the late 90s, early 2000. But that's all it is. There's nothing magical about it. You just be careful if you have high volumes. Just don't go much further than 60 minutes.
That's why you can also be careful because a lot of our clients will do cardio after they've done weight training. So if it's a really hard, intense weight session, you probably don't want them to be doing HIIT training right after. So then that's where you have to kind of gauge with your cardiovascular after, or it's more of a zone 1, zone 2, where you're not like further dipping their cortisol.
Yeah, and then there's been more studies too. I know the Japanese did studies on this a few years back where there's ways to mitigate this if you want longer hard training, which would be via intra or peri-workout nutrition, because most of these studies from the 90s, there was no peri-workout nutrition whatsoever. But if you are consuming essential amino acids and or carbohydrates in training, that will delay the downfall of DHA cortisol ratio. So there's ways to go around it. If you're training the elite and you need to do your training units and you have restriction in terms of time frame, you can truly mitigate this with proper nutrition.
Next question. The Optimized Strength Ratios program currently follows a 4-day microcycle. Would it be possible to adapt it to a 3-day microcycle? If so, how would you suggest organizing and structuring the program? For reference, let's assume the limiting lifts are overhead press and squat.
For that,
I like the precision of that question.
But for that, I think the answer is pretty simple. You still follow the 4-day structure, but the 4th day just turns into day 1 of week 2, and then you run 4-week-long mesocycles. I think that's the easiest way to get all the benefits of the program, because once you start trying to manipulate the session structures or take away a session,
Yeah, then you're picking and choosing
it's
what's
so hard.
yeah, you're not going to have the same benefits that none of the session structures were designed with that in mind, so it won't work as well. So just
switch it to 4 weeks long and then carry that 4th day as session 1.
So your macro cycles are going to be 16 weeks, mesocycles 4 weeks. It'll be fine.
Because the beauty of that whole system is in the details of everything and on how session 1 builds onto session 2, either upper and lower. And the assistance of one session builds the assistance of the second session and the primary of the first. So there's so much intertwined connection between both in order to prime the limiting lift that if you deconstruct that scenario, it won't work. So what Pork is saying is the only viable option, but then just know that it still won't be as effective because of the frequency at which you're repeating the exact same motor pattern. So, it's the best option, but it's still not ideal.
And for someone who's more intermediate to advanced, they'll still benefit from it, even though they don't need the repetition as much as, let's say, a novice. If you were going to do that, you probably wouldn't get as much benefit as someone who has
true, very true. But I do want to. I do want to say for the viewers, though, that although the optimizing strength ratio is part of the foundation bundle, optimizing strength ratio shouldn't be something you're worried about when dealing with a true novice.
Yeah. Well, you need, in order to really look at someone's numbers, you need somewhat of a training history to then assess what their limiting lifts are. So that's what we always say.
Yeah. But if you take a full-blown untrained lifter, and let's say you really wanted to, and you test all 8.
You're not saying to do this, but keep going.
You test all 8 primaries. Whatever strength ratio you get from this would kind of be meaningless because let's say the front squat is really weak. Well, maybe the front squat is really weak just because the trainee doesn't know how to front squat. So it has nothing to do with the actual strength of the front squat. It's more the intermuscular coordination of the front squat. So you need to just do front squat to increase it. So that's why I'm saying optimizing strength ratio, it's more like intermediate to advanced by default. Because if you follow the level 1 foundation and you do program design and then you go to the periodization, just this for 1 year of solid training is all you need. Then as you move on to year 2, 3, and 4, then you add in the optimizing strength ratio component to optimize what you've learned from program design and periodization. But if you try to, Thibaut was the first one to ask a question. In my opinion, he did it right because he did the level 1, but he really just focused on program design and periodization as a coach with his client for 1 year because he wanted to master the application of program design and periodization, and he didn't want to spend so much time learning the optimizing strength ratio now, confusing him on the application of the program design and periodization, knowing that his clients at this point in time training with him don't need that. And now that he's been doing our system effectively for over a year, now he's restudying the optimizing strength ratio, and now we can apply that information with these clients because at this point now it makes sense for them to keep going further with the optimizing strength ratio.
Next question. What muscle groups should have the main focus in the GPP for soccer players?
So the way we always look at training athletes is we want to train the athlete. We're not training for a sport. But if we're going to really go down that route, soccer is a far more lower body dominant sport. So addressing the lower body is going to be more important. So key muscle groups, the lower body muscular shirt, it is that. But you don't want to neglect upper body training. Upper body training still contributes to run velocity, jump height. So you can't just say, just train lower and be fine with it. So you still want an overall thing. But if you're really interested in what key groups, you then just assess, all right, what are the key groups that there is soft tissue injuries that are very prevalent in that sport. So that's the demands of the sport. What are the weaknesses associated with the player in front of you? Okay, and that's what you address. So it's going to be the hamstrings, it's going to be the groins, it's going to be the quads, probably going to be the calf musculature for more so on a
prevent
you want the ankle mobility side of things, but you also
knee stability.
There has been a rise in calf strains over the years in field-based sports, so people aren't addressing the calves appropriately. So it would be worth addressing that on the strength perspective as well.
Yeah, I'd say like the ankle and knee joint are probably like the
big ones,
the big culprit. But obviously anything around the hip. The hamstring. I mean, hamstring is important in anything that requires like
running,
short burst of speed.
Yeah.
And then you could argue that if untrained, maybe you might want to think about training neck extensors for soccer. But, you know,
when they get thrown to the ground,
it's less important than anything around
proper contact sports.
Yeah. But it's less important than anything that has to do with ankle or knee. But like Pork said, though, at the end of the day, you need to assess the athlete in front of you and train whatever is weak. Let's say that athlete has super weak abs and super weak lower back. It doesn't really matter what sport he plays or what position he plays on the field. Like that, this is something you need to address because it will affect his performance no matter what the sport or position is. So you have to be careful sometimes with being too specific with sports training.
Yeah, and then soccer players get like 8 weeks off season and then train or like play 2 to 3 games per week. So you're only going to be able to do so much. So really address the big bang for your buck things and let everything else fall into place.
This next question, it'll be good because I know, Steph, this is something I remember you changing your stance on probably around 2018, if I remember correctly. But when doing leg curls, do different foot positions, toes in, neutral, toes out, have a significant impact on the exercise? Could you explain how foot position influences the exercise?
Yeah, so to answer the question, does it have an impact? Yes. Does it have a significant impact? No. So just to put things in context, in my early days, what I've learned was that, feet turn in. You have more of the medial part of the hamstring being targeted when doing knee flexion. Feet turn out. You have more of the lateral part of the hamstring being recruited, and on and on. So you would train the client on, let's say, leg curl, and then you would look at where naturally they point their feet. So let's say most people will tend to point their feet out because you're stronger in that position. Well, then I'm like, okay, well, let's go feet in to try to balance the heads of the hamstring. But what I've learned from Kasim Henson after a call was that through his own research, what he's seen is that although you bias more of the medial or lateral head of the hamstring, depending on the foot position, the actual force output that you can do with feet neutral and dorsiflex is so much greater that, because if you have your feet neutral and dorsiflex, it's not like you're not recruiting medial and lateral hamstrings. You still are. But you're not favoring it. But because you're so much stronger, even though you're not favoring it, the actual amount of motor units recruited in these muscles are actually higher than when you're biasing it with a foot position. So the way I look at it as a strength coach is during a off. So if I'm training an athlete during a off season, in the early stage of GPP, I might want to maybe for one phase during the anatomical adaptation phase, target a foot position. Because at this point in time, overload is not really my concern. I'm really trying to bias certain parts of the musculature. So if I'm going to play around with foot position, it will be for the first phase of the anatomical adaptation of the off season of an athlete only. After this, I will move to neutral dorsiflex because the output and force production is so much greater that I don't have time to waste and mess around with other foot position when in the end I know that it won't even lead to greater outcome. So this I thought was really interesting, and he showed me the results and all that kind of stuff. So at one point, once you have like such information in front of you, it's hard to be like stubborn and be like, no, I'm going to keep going with. So since that was in 2020 actually. So since then, I'm almost exclusively using feet straight dorsiflex.
I'm not mad about it. Some of those other foot positions, it's like cramp city. You feel like you feel weaker in them for sure.
And if you have like messed up knees.
Well, especially on movement, because we saw it in California with some of our members in 2017 when we started the group training. Like, for example, foot turn in plantar flex on a kneeling leg curl when the patella is in contact with the padding. It's rough on the knees. A lot of little tweaks can happen. So
is that, I know you said so in like the anatomical adaptation blocks with an athlete, you would use the different foot positions, but I'm assuming it's...
But only if needed, though.
Yeah.
So only if needed. So I'm assuming sometimes these might be needed in the context of like a rehab. Someone coming back
that'd
for
be
something.
another time,
Yeah, so let's say...
the load is so light to begin with.
So but because the thing with rehab is you need to be very specific. So let's say the athlete had a hamstring strain of... I don't know, it doesn't need to be high level, but he has a strain, but that strain is in the medial head of the hamstring. Well, if I'm going to straighten it, I want to be as focused as possible in that area. Yeah. So you'll do that.
Also, people, it's not just the foot. Like, I know we call it foot in, foot out, but the whole leg needs to be, like, rotated in. Because if you just turn your foot and there's no rotation at the hip, it's not really going to have any impact on focusing on... Well,
not the whole leg. You cannot you cannot internally rotate your femur.
Well, a little bit.
I mean, not on a leg curl, though.
I mean, you can still turn it a little bit, because if you really only turn your foot, how is it affecting the knee? If the knee doesn't change position, you still have to have a slight rotation in the knee, in or out.
But the gastroc is involved in knee flexion. So if you plantar flex the foot, you're taking away a lot of the gastroc. So you're reducing load potential. So then if you're turning your foot in or out, but I don't know. Like, I don't honestly, I don't know.
I don't know the source, but I remember reading about it. And even just talking to people, like, you know, when we were teaching and stuff. And I've tried it. Like, if you just have to have a slight rotation in the hip, like from the, you know, the quad, and you'll feel it even more, like, medially or laterally.
Maybe, but I don't see how you could bend the knees properly let's say you're in a seated leg curl, with your femur hip width apart, and then you internally rotate the femur. So by default, it means that your both ankles are going to pop a few inches outwards. So how can you flex the knee without creating crazy strain at the knee joint? I'm not sure that. I don't know. That's outside of my. I've always focused more on moving the foot. I've never really focused on moving the femur, at least not on a leg curl machine. To me, that would be a crazy, like...
I mean, it's not inches. It's like just a slight few degrees.
Okay.
We'll try it later.
What is your opinion on using a weightlifting belt for intensities of above 90% on lower body lifts?
Do you want to talk about this?
Well, if that is what you want to do, obviously each to their own. We generally don't recommend it. So we lift weights to impose the stress upon our body. We don't lift weights to lift the biggest weight possible. So we lift as much as we can without aids. Like obviously we take straps out of that because your grip is going to always be a limiting factor in comparison to your posterior chain strength for the likes of a deadlift. But there's very little benefit in our application of weight training to adding aids that are just going to enhance your ability to lift heavier loads. But that's always my issue is, what is your goal? Is your goal to lift the heaviest weight possible? Okay, yep. So your goal is to be a power lifter or a strongman or Olympic lifter? Okay, yep. Use whatever aids is allowed within the confines of that competition. No problem. Is your goal to just be a stronger human being? If that's the goal, then why not do complete your training in a manner that you're going to be displaying your strength in everyday life? Because it's not like if you come across that you have to move a piece of furniture, you're not going to go say, all right, let me go put my weightlifting belt on to move this piece. Like, it's just not what we do. So I don't think you get much of a safety aspect from putting a belt on once you've learned to properly brace. And technically you still need to know how to properly brace to get any benefit out of using a belt. So I don't see the benefit of it. It's just going to inflate your numbers slightly, allow you to use more load, and then possibly impose different stress at different places that you're not prepared for. So
it's ego.
It's always something that I ask, because we have people, trainees that train the kilo style that do wear a belt when they get into the heavier lifts. And I always ask them, like, what is, like, why do they feel the need of using it? And a lot of the times it's like, basically they know if they're not wearing it, they, one, won't be able to lift as much, but two, they're probably going to hurt themselves without it.
Yeah. But
the belt is also just like, it reminds, it's like almost a central nervous system thing, is that you're more aware of your core. So you still have to brace, like you said, when you're wearing the belt. So the belt makes it easier for you to brace.
If you're not good at it.
But because
you're bracing against it.
But if you're really good at bracing, then the belt, obviously.
The way we train and the periodization models that we use, how often do you train over 90%?
Yeah.
Like, it's very rare. And then say you look at your training over the course of a year, you might have 2 mesocycles that go above 90%. That'd be a very normal, somewhat normal year, 90% or above. In those mesocycles, there's a good chance that you're going to be using standard sets and you're going to step load. So out of that, you maybe have 1 set above 90%. You're going to be okay.
Yeah. But I don't think that people view the whole 90% in like training the same, like that way specifically.
But that's the question, though. Yeah. So, but to me, so like we have students that bring their belt. At least the first time they come, they always bring their belt to class. And
only the first time.
No, but like typically, like, do I like it? Like deep inside, I cringe and it pisses me off. But
I usually know at some point.
No one's gonna bring.
Am I going to say something? No, because I don't know that. Like, he's coming up to a 2-day course for the first time.
Yeah,
like,
you're not going to change.
I don't know their background. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to say anything. But as soon as you're a client of mine, the only circumstance where I would allow it is what Porrick was talking about. If you're competing in an event that allows you to wear the belt, fine. Because on deadlift, for example, the belt has huge amount of load potential. But outside of this, to me, it's completely pointless, because that's exactly what Porrick said. What's the point of lift as much weight as you can on squat or deadlift, just for the sake of lifting as much weight as you can on squat or deadlift, if your core can't tolerate it? So if I'm training an athlete, which I've done in my career, why would I want my athlete to squat 400 with a belt, but 330 without a belt, and then he goes on the field and has the ability to exert 400 pounds of force with their knees and hip extensors, but doesn't have the core stability to cope with 400 pounds of force, guess what's going to happen?
Injuries.
So like the whole chain needs to be strong, equally strong in order for that strength to matter. So to me, the belt, I really don't like it. Like I have never used it, even as a little kid, when belts, like, when people would curl and bench with belts.
Putting a belt on your pants.
That's true.
He doesn't like wearing pants.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, like Porrick said, like, how often do you actually train at 90%?
Yeah.
And then,
but again, that's not like, to me, I know they're asking this specifically, but so many people, it doesn't matter if it's above 90%. It's just if it's a heavier for that rep, they'll put on the belt.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
We got a two-parter. So first part, it is said that how you recover is just as important as how you train. So what are your top recovery strategies? I am assuming adequate sleep will be one of them, and here is the second part of my question. I'm a shift worker, so adequate and consistent sleep is constantly compromised. What is your advice for enhancing recovery for people who cannot get adequate sleep?
I mean, if you're a shift worker, you have to be really, really diligent with, like, making sure that when you can sleep, that the room is dark, that the room is cool, that you're really trying to recreate that nighttime environment. So even before, like, if you've been working, you've been exposed to lights all day, like whatever, you have to make sure that when you get home, you dim the light, all the things that we would do for regular shift people. So people who go to bed at night, you want to set the tone for that. You just have to be able to do that, but during the day. Yeah.
The biggest thing that I could say make a difference around training is your peri-workout nutrition. Like, really optimize that. So, like we were talking about earlier, the whole testosterone cortisol thing, like, we can bring that into this light as well. So, like, you're going to use your intra-workout EAAs and carbs to dampen the cortisol effect and allow recovery to start a little sooner, not dip as much into the recovery curve. You make sure you get your post-workout shake. So make sure, and both like a carb and protein workout shake to really dampen the cortisol post-workout. You could even go as far, it's not something I would ever want to do, but some people really promote like box breathing at the end of the workout to lower your sympathetic tone and get back into a parasympathetic state. So stuff like that there. So once the workout's over, you're getting into that recovery state as soon as possible.
And ideally, I would think that you'd want them to train what would you do? When they wake up before they go to work?
Well, it depends on what
the
shift is. Yeah.
I've never trained a shift worker, so whatever I would say would be
it's hard.
There's be a guess.
Yeah, there's never an ideal situation with them, but again, somewhat be careful with the duration of the sessions.
Yeah,
like
I would say in regards to the training, you're not going to want high crazy intensity that you're slamming yourself with the training.
Yeah, like at some stage, like if you want to keep progression, you obviously have to keep increasing intensity, increasing volumes to really push things. But if you're ideally
depends too if their shift changes all the time. Ideally you're always on the same shift, so you're just basically living opposite to everybody else.
Yeah. My biggest thing was always trying to optimize the peri-workout window in terms of nutrition to at least start the recovery process as quickly as possible. So you're mitigating that factor. Like if your sleep is never going to be right, you have to understand that. But your nutrition, like peri-workout nutrition, like outside of peri-workout, can be perfect. So that can take care of a lot of the big stones.
I mean, in my opinion, like sleep is obviously a huge like component of recovery, but outside of this, I just feel like there's nothing more powerful than proper nutrition So I just think that whoever is dealing with these types of situations, they need to make sure they have a very well-rounded, adequate nutrition plan, making sure that they have a broad spectrum of micronutrients in their diet, so like the tissue is as healthy as it can, and then you monitor volume. Like in our OTAs we have this talk where I talk about you look at readiness and perceived exertion of the training session, and you adjust volume according to how the client is. So if you're in a phase of your life where sleep is disrupted, disregarding, it doesn't matter if you're a shift worker or not, if sleep is disrupted and then all of a sudden for an extended period of time your readiness is really, really low, you're always tired, you're always sore, you have no training drive, loss of appetite, well, then you need to decrease volume. There's nothing else that you can do that will be more specific than just monitoring the training prescription.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on oscillating strength training based on experience and research you've read?
Okay, I can start a bit on this, but I think Porik will be able to go deeper.
What is it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's many different definitions, but the current one is about like doing very quick, short range, fast movements. The big trend right now, it's on stabilizer muscles like at the shoulder joint, but it can be at the bottom of a bench press, at the bottom of a squat. You're doing like very short burst of contraction, relaxation, and it's based on Sherrington's law of reciprocal inhibition. So if you're contracting one agonist, you're training the antagonist to relax. And the better you are at relaxing the antagonist.
So wait, what would that look like on the bench? You're just doing this?
Yep.
Yeah, so like in the bottom, you're doing like short, very fast.
Yeah, like 4 to 6 inch range of motion, like
Right.
max.
Yeah, it's like quarter reps.
Well,
really.
remember in 2007 when we attended one of McGill's, Stuart McGill's conference, and he was talking about working with GSP on improving his ability at the trunk with a tornado ball to contract, relax, like really, really quickly. So that's what oscillating training is, and it's to teach that contract, relax, agonist, antagonist. And like some of the research shows, like so the South Korean did studies on this, and it showed like increase in hypertrophy. Like it was done at the shoulder joint, so it increased the hypertrophy of the rotator cuff muscle as opposed to a standard load when you did oscillating training at end range. You need to do this at the position of most at the most disadvantageous position. But personally, I've never used it.
Yeah, no. Same. Like I haven't ever really used it, but the whole idea behind it is to increase that efficiency of the contract relax, because that is how our musculature works in sport, is the best way to put it. Because like sprinting is the easiest example. The best sprinters in the world are the people who are able to contract and relax at the highest frequencies. So this is trying to teach the efficiency into the nervous system so that this can happen more seamlessly. Then it's both, while yes, it definitely addresses the musculature side of things, it also addresses the tendon side of things, because when you're doing this much of a jerky movement, your tendon's also going to be stretched. It's going to have tension placed on it in a very jerky manner, which is what happens at high velocity movement. So it's also going to have somewhat of a specific training for the tendons of the joints that are involved in the movement. So you could look at it as somewhat level of a preparatory exercise before introducing plyometrics into a program. I don't know if it'd be better than just doing extensive plyometrics, because it'd be more extensive plyometrics to still be more specific to what's upcoming and more specific of the load demands and stuff like that. But it could be looked at as somewhat of a preparatory exercise for that.
Yeah, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but because we haven't done the certification, but it seems like Andrea Spina and the internal strength model uses some of that stuff, right?
I think so. At times.
Yeah. So I mean, it's actually old, but it's getting popular. Like Jay Schroeder, like
Use that.
Adam Archuleta's coach in the mid '90s, used that a lot.
Yeah, I know Cal Dietz uses it.
Yeah, Cal Dietz. So, but it's something that
you don't really have experience with.
Yeah, but it's also it's one of those things that when dealing with team sport athletes in particular, you have so many other priorities to take care of. Someone's going to have to be really good before that becomes the priority, that this is the next step in what their progression needs to be. You normally have way bigger priorities and big bolder things to attack first that they're going to get way more benefits from before that'll ever really be your big, like the game changer, the needle mover, whatever the hell you want to call it.
Okay, couple more questions. How would a GBC phase be structured for hypertrophy and fat loss? Selection of exercises, sets, and reps.
I mean, hypertrophy, like the only way I could see GBC be efficient or effective for hypertrophy would be with a very early stage type of training. But like as soon as you're intermediate or advanced, I just don't see how you could build adequate hypertrophy out of GBC, because the average load is just too light. Yeah. So, I mean, so what's the specific of the question? How would it differ?
GBC phase be structured for hypertrophy and fat loss? Well, Annie says and fat loss, not or.
Well, so yeah. I mean, the structure of a GBC is upper body, lower body.
It's somewhat set in stone, so it is. So you're gonna pair a posterior chain based exercise with a lower body posterior chain based exercise with an upper body anterior chain based exercise. And then the inverse, so you're going to compare anterior chain lower body exercise with an upper body posterior chain exercise.
Yeah. The reps should fall between 10 or 20 on average.
Yeah.
The time under tension should be in the 60-second window. The rest period should be incomplete recovery. So depending on the size and strength of the athlete, it could be as high as 90 seconds or it could be as low as 15 seconds.
The sets are a lot. a lot.
Yeah.
But like
a GBC is a GBC.
Yeah.
There's
exactly.
No playing.
This last question, I'm sure it was directed towards me. Thoughts and guidance on strength training with the use of cannabis. So first, to me, I don't use cannabis
before you train.
Before I train,
it's not a pre-workout.
It's not in the office. I'm smoking my weed. But also, like, I went to the dispensary the other week, and the guy working there, he always sees me. He obviously knows I go to the gym, and he asked why I get weed, thinking that I use it for recovery, because people do use CBD and they use THC as well for recovery purposes. Personally, that's not why I smoke weed. So thoughts and guidance on strength training with the use of cannabis. I mean, honestly, most of the time I limit my cannabis use to the weekends. I also dramatically reduced how much alcohol I drink in the last couple of years, and not replaced it with smoking weed. But it's kind of like the balance of what I do for fun more. Yeah. I don't know. And for me personally, and when I talk to other people who do smoke weed, it does affect their motivation. People can wake up groggy in the morning. Yeah. That doesn't happen to me. So it's very individual, like anything.
Yeah. But you never, like, you're using this strictly on a recreational perspective. You never did you use that for the purpose of ergogenic aid.
And basically, like you said, it's like if it makes you groggy and it's going to affect your workout, then don't do it the day before you're going to train,
Yeah.
you know, and it just really, but like some people who do that, they do it for reducing anxiety, being able to sleep. I
And
mean,
people
yeah.
have to do it to increase appetite as well. So
Yeah.
a lot of people
Yeah.
use it for those purposes. But that's why I'm saying, like, me personally, I
Yeah.
don't have those specific uses of
It's for
cannabis.
fun.
That's true. I,
Just really like weed.
I do remember in the 90s, like in Montreal, like most of the bodybuilders at the gym, they would smoke weed for the sole purpose of increasing their appetite to gain weight.
I specifically choose which strains that I get to avoid getting
Yeah,
the
the
munchies
munchies,
because
yeah.
I've gotten lean smoking weed and I've gotten jack smoking weed. So you have to know how to control the
Yep.
use of it. Okay. This is episode 49. So our next episode will be episode 50 of Between Two Racks. So we don't know what our topic will be yet for episode 50.
Window shopping.
50 Cent. Yeah, we're going to need to bring back Gene in a little bit for the 50th episode. But send in more questions. Maybe it'll be a rapid fire Q&A, but we don't know. So we'll see you next week for episode 50.